Let's get into some Q&A, shall we, Drew?
We shall.
All right.
So our first question this week comes from DennisRoy23 on Instagram, and he simply states, underrated inks.
Is that a question or a statement?
We don't know.
Is that a demand?
Dennis is just asserting this, and it is up to us to deduce Dennis's needs. But we're going to go with just as if Dennis were requesting some of our picks for underrated inks.
All right. I think we can do that. Yeah. All right. I'll get into it. Okay. So
go for it.
For me, gosh, there's so many. There's very few inks that I just like absolutely hate. So honestly, at this point, we have 750 some inks or whatever. I could pretty much pick any ink that we've carried in the last 5 years, and I will be like, oh, I haven't really used this one that much. This is actually pretty decent. So yeah, for me, that's why I love the sample thing, is because you just get to try all different kinds of things. But some ones that I know that I've really enjoyed that don't get talked about quite as much, not necessarily ones that people dog on that I think are better. So I got to clarify a little bit, like where some of my opinions are coming from. These are ones that I think are really good, that I like a lot, that may or may not be popular, but I just think like are worth noting, and ones that I've had good experiences with. Not so much ones that people dog on, but I think don't deserve the dogging. They might just be ones that people just don't bring up all that much. So one is Urban Poussière de Lune. It's like a nice dusty purple, which I'm not a big purple ink guy, but the dusty purples are really good, especially if you're using it on like a bright white paper, like a Clairefontaine paper. I find like a nice dustier, kind of more subdued color is just a little easier on the eyes. You know, I do generally like bold ink colors, but sometimes, especially on white paper, if you're using just like a bright, bold, punchy color, it can be like just a bit much, you know? So I do like that one because it's really subdued. And in fact, if you use that one like a cream or an off-white paper, I think it looks really good too. Then you're getting that almost like a, I don't know, anything that's like a dustier kind of subdued color, or like a light brown color, like a sepia tone, that looks so good on an ivory paper. You get kind of like that old world kind of look. I think you get that with a little bit of a dusty purple too. I don't know, just like kind of like a royal color, like an old world royal color. I don't know, but that Poussière de Lune is really nice, really, really good shading. And I like that one a lot. Lit d'été is another one that is another Urban color. That's one that I think falls into that same category of that like light brown. It's basically named after tea. This is another Urban color that I just don't get, but people find it popular. It's Rouille d'encre. It's a dusty anchor. It's like a pale pink. It does shade really well, so I get that, but it's just not my color preference. But it always just gets so much more love than I would expect. It's got a very loyal following, but still not a lot of people have really heard of it. So if that happens to be your thing, if you like rusty anchors, or rusty anchors, not, did I say dusty? I might have said dusty before.
Yeah.
I don't know how an anchor is dusty. It must not be getting used very much as an anchor because they go into water. Anyway, rusty anchor. That makes more sense. Water rusts things. Anyway, so that happens. Noodler's Blue. You know, I mentioned that last week, I think. I use that. I have always loved Noodler's Blue. It's just named kind of boring. It's just named blue. You know, it's like, so things I think that have more exotic names might get a little more attention online, but it's just a great blue. So I love that one. I love Robert Oster Blue Water Ice. I think there's so many mid-range blues that it's easy to get kind of lost in the crowd. But Robert Oster, cool company. They have just a very low impact environmental thing. That's like a really, strong characteristic of their company. But that Blue Water Ice is tremendous shading. It's a little bit lighter in color than Noodler's Blue, not quite as intense. Great shading though. And I really enjoy it. So easy on the pen as well. Very easy to clean. And then last one I had was Diamine Syrah. And this one's kind of a throwback because I remember like a decade ago or so when Diamine came out with that color. It was actually kind of Richard Binder's thing because I think he was mixing Schaefer Burgundy and something else. I can't remember what color it is, but he basically like had kind of a fountain pen network credit to him for mixing this kind of color. And then he kind of worked with Diamine and shared this out, and they came out with Diamine Syrah. So props to Richard Binder for doing that. But I remember when that happened like a long time ago. I think we sold the business in the house at that time. But I used it and I was like, man, this is really good. And every time I revisit it, I'm like, wow, this is such a great, just kind of like wine color. It's kind of dark. It has good shading, but it's not too intense. I don't know, it just strikes a really good balance for me. So those are some of my favorites. They're not like completely off the radar, but I just think they're really great, solid inks and worth looking at. How about you, Drew?
Those are really good choices, and I agree with all of them. Going along what Brian said about those kind of mid-range blues getting lost in the crowd, one I do think gets lost in the crowd is Noodler's Midway Blue. It's got a really cool name. It's one of their V-Mail series, which has a cool kind of reverse engineered story behind them all. And it's a very, very nice blue, a little bit more on the lighter side than Noodler's Blue. But if you're like me and you like to write the name of your ink on pretty much whatever you're writing Midway Blue is just a fun word to write. Midway has, some ups and some downs in it. I really do like writing that word. And the Battle of Midway was, if you're a history nut or, a World War II nut, there's that as well. So it's got a good story behind it, just like a lot of other Noodler's inks do. Generally, I think that they're Noodler's normal inks, like red, green, blue, brown, they're all really good colors.
Yeah.
But you can usually find pretty much the same thing, but with a cooler name. And, that's what I think Midway is, though it is lighter than blue. I will say it is a shade lighter.
It like dances into that turquoise territory.
Which means it has slightly better shading, Brian.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Another one I think is underrated is Noodler's Cayenne. I love spicy food. I put cayenne pepper on a lot of things, so it's kind of near and dear to me because I just like the actual spice. But Noodler's Apache Sunset is immensely popular. Noodler's Habanero, also popular, not so much as Apache, but those two get a lot of press. Cayenne is like that third, orangey red that doesn't get as much
credit. It's like the middle child of the three, it just kind of gets lost a little bit.
It's the darker of the three. So in my opinion, if you're going to write with a larger nib, but you still do want that legendary orangish Noodler's shading, Cayenne is the way to go. Even though it is more red than orange, it does, it's more legible if you're writing with, a 1.1 or 1.5, whereas something like Apache, which is the lighter of the three, it can fade out a little bit more. It doesn't have as much punch.
Yeah, it's got a stronger yellow tone to it. The Cayenne, like you said, is stronger on the red. I think any of the three of these could almost, if you use them in like a blind test, it would almost be hard to tell which of the three of them that it is if you didn't actually know. But I think the red might give it away on the Cayenne. I think the
Cayenne's more away than Habanero and Apache
I think it's a little more distinct than the Apache and Habanero. I think those two are easy to confuse with each other.
And another one I wanted to mention, or another two that I wanted to mention, are the first sheening inks that I ever used. And right now, inks are being marketed as sheening inks. Right. When I first started using fountain pens and inks, that was not the case. But there were a few that did it, and the more iconic ones that I remember were Diamine, Majestic Blue, and Pilot Iroshizuku Yamabudo. And Yamabudo has this funky kind of mustard sheen to it within its kind of deep magenta, and Majestic Blue has that kind of classic reddish sheen to their blue ink. And this was before they did it intentionally a lot. And it was kind of like a secret, like, oh, this ink does this special thing if you know what to look for. So one thing, you might actually buy an ink that has sheening properties, or maybe marketed as having sheening properties. You might get it home, and it might do the crazy sheening, but it also might be a little bit more high maintenance on your pen. If you go back in time a little bit and go and try to use some of these OG sheeners, they're not going to be as high maintenance on your pen, but you are going to get that highlighty punch of a sheen. So I highly recommend you kind of going back in time and checking out some of those old school guys. And then going back to what Brian said about the Urban inks, pretty much any of their Urban inks could potentially be underrated inks. That is a line that has been consistently high quality for many, many years. Their colors aren't the most vibrant and punchy, but they're good inks, just overall very good inks, well-behaved inks too. And I've spoken with pen makers before who say that one of the only inks that they can recommend just will not ever damage their pens is the Urban original line. It's just extremely well behaved. And if you have a pen that you find might be a little bit more sensitive, of the inks that we carry, that one might be the best go-to. My personal favorite is Vert Prey. It's a lime green. I probably butchered that pronunciation, but that one's a go-to for mine. And then finally, wrapping it up with Diamine Graphite. This was one of my favorite grays. Before I discovered Lexington Gray and before Diamine Earl Grey came out and overshadowed Graphite. Graphite has just the tiniest little hint of green to the gray, but it is enough of a hint that it doesn't feel like just plain old gray. So I really love that one, and I think it's worth checking out.
Yeah, graphite is a great color. I can attest that. It literally just looks like a pencil. I think I'll throw in an honorable mention to Noodler's Lexington Gray because it looks very similar to Diamine Graphite, but it has the waterproof properties as well. But that one does get a lot of love, so I don't know if I could really classify it as underrated. But yeah, I think, you mentioned Majestic Blue. I do love that color. That was one of my original like deep blue colors, and it's still in my favorites ink color set.
Yeah, and that one, I don't think that one's necessarily underrated, but I think that as a sheening ink, it has been left in the past.
Yeah,
and that's kind of why I wanted to revisit that one.
Exactly. And I think, related to that one specifically, I think there's a couple other ink colors from different brands that are similar to it that are probably actually pretty legit underrated. One of them is Noodler's Ottoman Azure, which is very... I like that one. It's very, very similar to Majestic Blue. And then Private Reserve actually has one, the Electric DC Blue. So all of those are deep blues with kind of that red sheen to it. So I think that any of those three is definitely worth consideration. And the reason those were so popular like a decade or so ago is because really the original sheening ink that got everybody all excited was the Parker Penman series, which it was a solvent-based ink. It was a whole different beast. And it was an ink that was discontinued in the mid-90s. So it was like legendary status because you basically couldn't really find it anymore. And I think that those three inks were some of the ones that approached the heavy sheen with the deep blue that you had, and specifically Parker Penman Sapphire, which was like the one that was the standout of that group. But there have been a lot that have come out since. I think Organic Studio Nitrogen now would be the modern Parker Penman Sapphire, substitute, because it's just a super duper sheener. But yeah.